Okay, so we're live. Once again, we're done with the AP exam, so you guys requested that I show you some of how I use Excel. Last time I kind of
Okay.
went over basics for how to fill in fields and use formulas. I'm going to show you some more examples of how I've been using it in the classroom, and hopefully you get an idea of how you might end up using this in your job later on.
Yeah.
Um, so I'm going to show you a couple things. First, I've got a file that I sent you called Projectile Motion Random Generator Test Demo. And what this is a document that takes in a bunch of initial values for projectile motion. So in this case, I can input an initial velocity, angle, and height. So that's how fast I shot an object, at what angle in degrees, and how high in meters. So this is meters per second for velocity, how high in meters, and then angle that we shot it at. And then
Okay.
all of these extra columns are updated automatically based on formulas that I've typed in. So if I jump in this one, you can see for initial vertical velocity, I'm taking the initial velocity and multiplying times the sine of the initial angle, and then dividing by 180, multiplying by pi to convert it to radians, since the sine function in Excel only takes radians. So what that's
Okay.
doing is that's getting the vertical component of that initial velocity. Same thing over here for horizontal velocity.
Oh,
For horizontal velocity, I'm using the cosine instead. So that's breaking up my initial velocity into horizontal and vertical components. If I wanted the time that the object reaches its max height, I can take the initial vertical velocity and divide by 9.8, and I've got all of these other formulas that I've solved for in general form in order to give me more information about what's happening with this projectile motion problem. Okay, then I've also sent you a test regen document. Which I've got to let load, so give it a second. Okay, there we go. So this is a document where I've got a number of different values here at the top that are all
uh-huh.
variables. And so what I did originally was I would go into my Excel document where I had solved all of the problems already. Oop, wrong one. I'd go into my Excel document where I've solved all of the problems already, and just replace what my initial vertical velocity would be with whatever was in this column. So I could hit find and replace all v number signs with 10 point whatever that was, 10.988. Okay, and I hit replace all, and now everywhere in the document where I had a v number sign, you can see that that's been replaced with that randomized value. Okay, and I've got a ton of these variables in the document. If I scroll down, you can see I've got a section here, the first 6 pages are what I would actually print out for the student. But then also I wrote a scoring guide where I've solved each one as a variable for my answers. So that when I go in and replace all of these values with the Excel document, it'll end up printing a scoring guide that I can use to grade the student work step by step. And then for my pre-calculus
And that's what
class,
and that's what they use to uh for my AP exam.
no, for your AP exam, it's all graded by hand.
Oh, okay.
Um, but what I'm doing here is I was trying to come up with a way that I could give feedback to students faster um, than normal for my pre-calc class this year. Um,
Oh,
so what this is letting me do is as soon as the students submit their test, I can give them a scoring guide that shows them step by step how I would have solved the problem and how I'm going to grade them, so they can get an idea of how they did right away. Also, because I'm using randomly generated values for their initial velocity, angle, and height within some set parameters, everyone's test form, I created 17 different forms of a 6-page exam, are all different. Okay, so my end result ends up looking like this. So here's Form 4, which I think was Nikita this year. I don't actually have any of his works, so even though his name's on here, there's nothing from Nikita on here. Where I've randomly generated all of my values for initial velocity, angle, and height. And then in my scoring guide, all of the proper values for how you would have solved this have replaced all of those variable values that I had in my regen document. So you see all of these code markers here have been replaced with the actual numbers that you would have got if you did the calculations. So by creating those formulas in Excel that take variables instead of an actual number, I'm able to quickly solve all of the problems 17 different times with different values by just solving it once in variable form in my regen document. And it prints out really nice for the students. And kind of makes it easier for me to grade because I've got a step-by-step solutions for all 17 different forms of this exam with a rubric that tells me what I was looking for points. So it's a little bit faster for me too. It is a fair amount of work to set up, and I've changed the way that I do this since then. So I'll show you what I'm doing right now. I'm still creating an Excel document based on a regen document that I do by solving all of these problems by hand with no numbers. Instead of using numbers, so the only number you see here is my constants, negative 9.8, the acceleration due to gravity is a constant because all of these problems are on Earth. Everything else is a variable. But I'm solving in terms of every other variable, that way I can go back and replace them with what that number would have been for each individual test. Then I actually coded this in Visual Basic. So this is a programming language that I can use to do all of that finding and replacement that I used to do by hand in one step as a program. So what this does is it loads up my Word document that I've created for my test regen document for each form. So that's form plus counter, which is a number, form 1 plus docx. It's going to load that document. Then it's going to reference my workbook sheet to go from A1 to A25. So that's looking at all of my inputs for A1 all the way through 25 down here. It's actually for a different test that I was using this for, so I had a little bit more rows, but and then it takes those values and just replaces everything that's referenced in that list with elements from the Excel document. So basically, I've got this massive column.
And how do you save that Word document to apply it on the Excel?
So it's actually done down here in the code. I'm already modifying it here. This is basically a macro that opens up a Word document and then hits the replace feature and then fills in the fields that I want. So it fills in the code and then replaces the replace with field with values taken from my Excel spreadsheet.
Okay.
Where was I?
Does the Excel sheet has to be open so the Word document can read it?
Yes.
Or can it be just
on
on your driver?
Right now, my Excel sheet is open, but my code is actually opening each individual Word document. I've got one different Word document for every form. And then this while statement means as long as my counter is less than or equal to 18, it's going to keep running through this as a loop. At the end of each loop, it adds 1 to the counter. So it'll open up form1.docx, replace all of the values with the values that are in that that column with its referenced element. So for my test regen document, at the top of these pages, I've got this massive undo what I just did last time. I've got this massive list of a bunch of variables, and it's just going to go through and replace variable 1 with the first row in my Excel document, A1. Then replace variable 2 with A2 and variable 3 with A3. And because I've listed in my regen documents, all of those numbers are listed as a code. If they just replace those code with the actual numbers, then I end up with all the answers that I expected in my Word document.
Mm-hmm.
Here. Okay, so after we run through the code, I end up with a student form that's blank and about 6 pages long, and an answer sheet, which is both how I'm going to score them and what I can send back to the student after they complete the exam. It has step-by-step solutions and a rubric. The power of Excel is really just that you can create all of those formulas and update your fields in real time. So if I change this initial velocity right now to 15, you can see my vertical velocity and all of my fields after this also change accordingly.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Okay, so that's kind of an extreme example where that's about the hardest thing I do with Excel. So I'm going to break out of this and do something a little bit more common. So here I've got your final exam from last year for pre-calculus with everyone's scores and average results. And I do this for almost every test that you guys take. What I've got here in the rightmost columns, so you can see I've got derivatives are both in E and S. I've got the raw amount of score points that this person scored. I've removed the names, but for person number 2, scored 6 points out of what was possible for derivatives. And then over in column E, I've got a formula where there are 12 points possible for derivatives. So I'm taking whatever was listed in this column S, which I named UC derivative 2, dividing by 12. So that gives me a decimal for the percentage of how much derivatives did you get correct, and then multiplying by 100. So you got 6 out of 12 correct. That gives you 0.5 times 100 is 50%. And I'm just doing that for each of these topics. So for continuity, this person scored a 4.7. 4.7 divided by 5 times 100 gives me a 94% for continuity. Okay, then I usually score your tests 2 different ways. I've got a raw score, which just adds up all of the points that you got correct. So I'm summing up everything within the table from UC derivative 2, that's from this column S, all the way to the end of the column at integration. So it sums up all of the total points they've got correct. I divide by the number of total points that there are on the exam and multiply by 100, and you get a percent that is your raw score. This particular person didn't do too well, so they had a 37.9 on this particular test, if I just took a raw score. But then I also do a weighted average. So that's if I took the average of all of your percents of each topic, what would your score be? And then for the final score, I'm taking the maximum of either your p-score or your raw score. So in this case, their p-score was higher than their raw score, so that's what goes into the gradebook. On the bottom, I've got averages for the entire class. So I'm taking an average of all of the fields in B2, B3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So that's the average of all of these fields that are in score. And it prints that here for me. So if I go and I update this, update this person's derivative score, so let's say I misgraded this and they actually got 8 correct. So I'm going to change this to 8 and hit enter. And you can see automatically their derivative p-value increases, which also increase their average p-score and their raw score by the right amount, so that their score is updated and the average for the whole class is updated. You can also see their derivative average is also updated when I do that. So I'm going to change it again. So watch these fields I'm highlighting right now are all going to automatically change once I change the score. Okay, so I'm going to change this to 6. You can see the derivative score is updated. The average for the whole class on the derivatives is updated. Their p-value, raw score, actual score, and the average for the whole class is all automatically updated when I change their score here. Okay, this also makes it really easy for me to go back and say, okay, I know our students did not do too well on this exam because my average was a 55. But I can be a little
Yeah.
bit more specific and start breaking down what our students didn't actually know at our school. So overall, on average, our derivative scores are okay, but our integration
Yeah.
scores are not okay. So usually the next step that I would do with this is just to start highlighting things as either red, which means we need to go back and reteach, yellow, which means some of the class needs it retaught, or green, which means the class is generally okay. So I might say
Okay.
anything over a 70 is maybe yellow. Anything over an 80 is green. So I'm going to do this. I'm just holding control and pressing shift to make everything yellow. Again, I'm holding control and pressing shift to make stuff red this time.
Can you not write a code for everything that is above 70? It's yellow.
I could actually. I could actually write an if statement that would update those fields. Let me go ahead and do that just to show you how I could do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump into, this is actually the first field I need it for here. I'm going to write an if statement. So this is, I'm going to hit the formula button here and go into if. So this takes 3 different arguments. So it's if there's a logical test, and then what happens if it's true, and then what happens if it's false. And it's just going to fill in this field with whatever I want it to fill in if it's true, whatever I want it to fill in if it's false. So here we go. My logical test is if this entry for E11 is above 70 and below 100. Then if
Shouldn't
it's
it be below 80?
oh right, to 80 value if true, I'm gonna say I don't know. Okay. Then value if false. I'm actually going to go through and create another if statement. If for my logical test, I'll do 80 is greater than or equal to 70 is greater than or equal to greater than or equal to, I need my field. 11 is greater than or equal to 70. Then I'm going to write this as value if true is, you can't see that, but that was quotation marks. And you might be able to see it over here when I'm typing a little bit better, maybe. Quotation marks, some retest. And then value with false, I'm going to have one more if statement. If, actually value with false, I've already failed being okay or being some retest, so I can just put value with false means retest all. Okay, and I can hit enter. So it's a formula. Oh, I didn't close my parenthesis. I don't think. So I'm gonna try that again. Do I have more? No. Okay, what else did I do? Hmm. there we go. Okay, I had an extra equal sign in there. My bad. Okay, so I'm just going to copy this, that whole formula, and then highlight all of those other fields that I want to put this in and just paste. Okay, so I know this is not working right now because everything showed up as okay. Check this. F11. Okay, it is updating the field. F11 is between 100 and 80. It is not between 100 and 80 right now. Else. I'm trying replacing these with values and see if that works instead. Value of true, true, value of false. I feel like that should work. Let's read those down. Okay, first I'm going to need another if statement here because if that's not true. No, I don't. So I already run through the first if. Not entirely sure what I did wrong here. Try this. Okay. All right, I know what I did. So when I'm doing that logic value, I can't test within a range. I have to test just greater than or equal to. So I've rewritten my code to be a little bit more efficient. But if E11 is greater than 80, then it will write OK. If not greater than 80, then I run my next if statement. If it's greater than 70, then I'm going to post some retest. And if it's not some retest, then I'm going to put retest all because I've already run through the other two if statements. If it's not greater than 70, I know it has to be less than 70. Okay, so let me delete this again. I can copy this formula. Even though it says E11, it's really getting the relative position of E11 to itself. So when I go to paste it into all of these other fields, instead of checking field E11, it's now checking F11 because that's the next column. So it's just the row above itself.
Okay.
Okay, then I can highlight all of these, and I believe I can do some conditional formatting for color scales. Which I've actually never done for a field before, so let me try again. New role. Let me try again. Do the numbers because I know those will work. Okay, so I just formatted as a color scale. So that gives me an kind kind of what areas are the student's general strengths and what areas are the general student weakness.
Okay.
If I just do that as a straight color scale, so green, yellow, red, then it just orders from least to greatest, makes the greatest values more green and the least values more red. So I can see we're okay on continuity. I'm okay on derivatives. I'm okay on graphical analysis, probability, and nonlinear functions. But I might need to retest on some of these other topics. And that might help me figure out what we're going to teach next week.
Okay. Well, that's really a good way to find out.
Yeah, so Excel just kind of keeps everything organized for me. Also, for an individual student, so I can come in conference and say, okay, even though my whole class is retesting on integration, this particular student who scored a 46 has a really high integration score, but had zeros on probability, sign modeling, and vectors. Probability, I'm not planning on redoing in class, but he scored a 0. So I might call this particular student in after school and just do lessons on probability because I know we're not going to cover that in class anymore since the class doesn't need it, but he does. So something like that. I'm sure whatever you're actually going to use Excel for is going to be different for whatever you do in your job. But Excel's commonly used just to keep things organized. Anything related to math.
Yeah, you can use Excel for pretty much everything.
Okay, so today was mostly just to give you an idea of what's possible with Excel. I did kind of push the boundaries of my own personal limits for what I know how to do and what I don't know how to do a little bit. So I'm not quite used to coding within Excel itself, but there's a lot you can do with Excel. There's a lot more than what I've shown today. Next class period, I'm going to take a look at some graphing stuff. So how we can create different types of graphs in Excel and just present your data a little bit better.
Okay.
I'm going to type up a quick homework assignment where I'm going to ask you to create an Excel spreadsheet. And I think we'll end there. Okay, thank you very much for coming.
Okay, thank you.
Bye.
Have a nice day. Bye.
Bye.